Hey friends, tonight we'll walk right through the heart of why the Vatican truly feared the Anunnaki. A slow rain has rinsed the cobblestones clean. Rome breathes in the hush after midnight, the lamps pooling honey over stone, the Tiber moving like a dark thought. Before we begin, please like and subscribe, only if this truly helps you unwind. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now lie back and get comfortable. Let's begin tonight's story. Hello, dear listener, and welcome to our tale of why the Vatican truly feared the Anunnaki. Chapter 1: Ash of Nineveh, Ink of Rome. The night in Rome is a soft bell. It rings in the marrow more than the ear, and its chime drifts through courtyards where ivy drinks the last of the drizzle. Here, at the city's drowsy hour, the stones remember. They remember emperors and pilgrims, printers and penitent scholars, arguments that lasted until dawn, and prayers that moved like low winds inside chapels lit by trembling flames. If you listen, you can almost hear parchment exhale. And so, beneath the mild breath of a passing cloud, we enter a library by imagination, the kind of room that every city keeps hidden somewhere in its long coat. The air smells of linen and glue and a sweetness like almond that the old bindings give off when they rested many centuries. A table waits. Upon it, a small lamp, a tray of clean slips, a dish of black ink, a magnifying lens that has made many letters larger than their own lives. Shelves lift their shoulders in the half-light. Spines whisper in rows. This is where our question chooses to sit quiet, but awake. Why would the Vatican, that old seat of learning and devotion, truly fear the Anunnaki? The question walks softly because it knows the floorboards are full of history. It does not burst in with loud certainty. It does not accuse. It wonders, and we follow it, one padded step at a time, along a corridor lined with memory. First, a gentle truth for the soul at rest. The Anunnaki belong to the oldest stories of the old rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. Their names arrive to us on clay, impressed by the reed stylus of hands that have vanished like breath on a mirror. Mesopotamian priests and poets set those marks down. They sang of lords and judges in the underworld, of those who gathered in assembly, of the luminous ones who weighed destinies, of the long lines of authority as steady as a levee against the flood. These were not little green rumors from the sky. They were deities within a human vision of order and rain and law. They were thunders, etiquette, harvests, calculus, the bureaucracy of the divine. To speak their names was to speak the politics of eternity. But Rome, as night eavesdrops, is filled with other names, and the Vatican breathes among them. The Vatican is not a person. It is many rooms of thinking and praying, many centuries of debate laced through with silence. Fear, for such a place, is not a sudden scream. It is a careful concern, the kind that rises where the border between story and creed blurs like ink in a puddle. It is a listening fear. What do these old river stories ask of us? Do they ask us to change our reading of our own beginnings? Do they walk side by side with the first chapters of Scripture, where the evening and the morning were once numbered like beads on a thread? In the hush, a reader draws up a chair. Her hands are steady. Her candle is patient. She opens a volume that smells of late autumn and distant barley. The page is a translation of a tablet from Nineveh, and the language steps into the room as if it had just put down a jar of dates on the threshold. The Anunnaki convene in council. They decree, they lift and lay down fates. They are not a rumor. They are the logic of a civilization looking for patterns in everything unruly. The reader traces a line with her finger, and the river runs under her nail. Now we drift to another desk, where a different book lies open. Not clay rendered into English, but a Latin voice that speaks calmly across 1500 years. Augustine, reflecting on the weight of the antique gods, tests each story for truth and for the soul's good. The Church does not fear names. It studies them. It frames them. It asks, what do these names want from the human heart? Are they shadows that need light, or lamps that need trimming? The question of the Anunnaki, when it finally reaches the Vatican door, centuries after cuneiform first rose up from the deserts and ship decks of 19th century discovery, arrives as many questions do. On a cart piled with dictionaries, behind a scholar with tired eyes and an unshakable courtesy for the dead. In the hush of our imagined room, we hear other footfalls, the sound of philology obediently climbing stairs. Assyriology, brave and gentle, brings tablets to the modern tongue. The Vatican and the world's other old houses of learning cannot help but listen. These tablets speak of creation, of flood, of kings whose years are longer than shadows at noon. They speak of the heavens assigned, of temples that stand like mountains grown a will. And in those lines, the Anunnaki move like magistrates. For anyone who has loved the first pages of Genesis or held the book of Daniel open beneath a lamp, there is a twinge of recognition. Rivers remember rivers. Stories nod to stories across the centuries like ferrymen at opposite banks. Is that the fear? The thought that someone else told a story of the beginning and lore before you did? The thought that a clay tablet, dry as bone, might whisper a parallel you cannot ignore? Fear is a strong word, and the night asks us to be tender with it. The Vatican has felt many things: caution, reverence, skepticism, and even delight when faced with the world's time-worn myths. But beneath the clerical diplomacy and the careful notes in the margins, there lies the old human tremor. If truth is one, why are there so many maps? If the garden has one gate, why do so many paths walk toward it from different horizons? The rain lifts, the lamps hum. The river moves on with the patience of long distances. Our reader takes up another book, a little modern, a little breathless. It claims that the Anunnaki descended from the sky in ships, that they engineered human life, that ancient stone remembers their workshops and their long, metallic sighs. The book is clever with mystery and heavy with certainty. It delights in the wilder branch of wonder. The Vatican has weathered such gusts before. It knows how stories gather thunder around themselves. It knows the difference between a question that humbles and a claim that tries to dazzle. What then, truly, has this old city ever feared about the Anunnaki? Perhaps it is not the gods of the rivers themselves, nor the ornate councils on clay. Perhaps the tremor rises when their names are used to break the thread of patience, to say that nothing in the Pilgrim's Book can be read slowly. Any more that tradition must be dropped like a hot coal, because an ancient syllable cracked in the light. Institutions built on careful time and careful reading do not tremble at the existence of other ancient tales. They tremble at speed, at the rush to swap a long apprenticeship for a quick astonishment. They tremble at the ease with which we choose spectacle over the slow dignity of truth. And yet, step closer. There is another layer, a more intimate, sore place beneath the robe. The Anunnaki lords, judges, watchers of the old assembly stand for a vision of order in which power is distributed among many bright seats. In certain Mesopotamian hymns, fate is a committee meeting. A decree is a set of minutes recorded by hands that smell of clay and lamp oil. By contrast, The heart of Christian doctrine leans toward unity, toward a single fountain of being from which all streams run. This is not a question of who is correct tonight, for we are here to rest, not to argue. It is a question of feelings. How does it feel for a church that guards a monotheistic center to sit with a cosmology where authority is a chorus? It feels like listening to another orchestra play across the river, beautiful, complex, but not your score. There is a tenderness in that distance, and a twinge. Will my people hear their song and forget ours? So we imagine a monk 400 years ago copying a passage from a traveler's report about Nineveh. His quill scratches, he pauses, rubs his eyes, and prays not to lose his line. He is not afraid of the Anunnaki. He is afraid of confusion, of that small fog that creeps into a novice's mind when too many maps are left open at once. He wants the heart to rest in its one clear meadow. The Vatican has often been a shepherd of clarity in the dark. Its fear, then, is pastoral. It worries sleepers who wake too suddenly to 10 suns rising. From the shelves, a small relief catches the lamp. Winged figures move in shallow space, their beards carved like rivers that do not dare to flood. A tree of life stands between them. The art speaks a language of exactness and ritual, each feather a sentence. The Anunnaki, as we imagine them tonight, are not monstrous. They are stately. They are protocol in human form. Their faces are patient as courtroom clocks. The Vatican's old timetables recognize the smell of such rooms. It has councils and canons, too. It knows what happens when assemblies decree. Perhaps it does not fear the existence of another assembly, but rather the possibility that our need for order might be tempted to call every distant committee divine. The Church wants a ladder that rises, not a tower of many floors with lights on in each window. It wants simplicity to kiss magnificence without getting lost. Now, bend your ear. The rain is gone. The gutters sing lightly, and somewhere a cat walks like a fragment of night across a little piazza. Our reader turns to a page of Genesis. There were giants in the earth in those days. She lets the sentence rest on her palm like a stone drawn warm from the sun. Those giants, Nephilim, have been woven into many theories, some gentle, some feverish. The Anunnaki to the excitable mind seem close cousins. But the careful mind remembers that words are not passports. Resemblance is not proof. The Vatican's caution here is a librarian's caution. Do not shelve books together because their covers wear similar colors. Read them, taste their vowels, sit with their authors until their breath becomes familiar. Fear breeds in haste. Peace grows in distinction carefully made. And so the night offers a kindness. Time to see that 19th century excavations brought the tablets to Europe with equal parts scholarship and imperial appetite. Time to see that the Church, along with universities and museums, learned from those tablets about flood traditions, about kingship myths, about the way ancient peoples counted the bones of their days. Time to see that, in the 20th century, patient translators taught classrooms full of students to hear Akkadian and Sumerian with something like affection. In that time, an institution like the Vatican did what it has often done when faced with the deep past. It breathed, it listened, and it added footnotes to its soul. Fear, where it rose, was not of the old names themselves. It was of the modern storms that like to sweep old names into new spectacles. The lamp burns lower. The reader warms her fingers around a cup that has forgotten its steam. She thinks of the Vatican Observatory, where men with calm hands point instruments at the night while reciting prayers that were written before telescopes were even a rumor. She thinks of how the Church has, more than once, said that if life existed beyond our small blue bead, truth would not shatter. The Maker would still be one, and love would still be the grammar of the cosmos. In that confidence, the Anunnaki cannot threaten. They can, at most, invite an old house to dust an old shelf, to read with fresher eyes, to teach with cleaner distinctions. Fear fades when confidence is humble, but stories are not only made of right angles, they are also made of moonlit anxiety, and so our chapter keeps faith with the human heart. There is always a moment, especially at night, when other people's gods look taller than they are by daylight, their shadows stretching like cathedral aisles across our rooms. In that moment, a guardian of doctrine remembers how easily grandeur seduces. The Anunnaki, clothed in the dignity of the first cities, carrying the clipboards of destiny, stand like statues at the edge of one's garden. The heart hears their marble stillness and wonders if its own gate will hold. The Vatican, being a keeper of gates, knows this sound. Its fear is not a panic. It is the soft turning of a key at dusk, not to lock the world out, but to teach those inside how to open and close with wisdom. Come, rest your eyes. Let me tell you a little story inside our story, a parable drawn from the pages under our lamp. There once were two scribes who served the same king. One loved to multiply notebooks, the other loved to reread. The first scribe believed every new tablet was a new world. The second scribe believed every new tablet was an old world talking again. One evening, a shipment arrived from a city that had slept under sand for 1,000 years. The first scribe danced and cried that everything must now be rewritten. The second scribe smiled and said that everything must now be read again. The king kept them both, but when he could not sleep, he called for the second, because the second knew how to place old and new on the same shelf without either falling. The Vatican, old as it is, keeps both in its halls the dancer and the rereader, but when the hour grows late and the souls grow tired, it leans toward the one who and still, the question lingers like incense. Why truly feared? The adverb asks us to refuse the easy drama. It asks us to sift. If there is a true fear here, it may be this: that the Anunnaki, dressed in the authority of ancient time, could be used to estrange us from the slow disciplines that keep us human, context and humility before past minds. The Church fears any road that shortcuts those disciplines, because without them the heart grows credulous, and credulity is not the same as faith. Faith trusts slowly, credulity rushes. Faith loves the long labor of understanding. Credulity takes the first glitter that offers to dazzle and calls it a crown. So the lamp lowers again. The river presses its shoulder against its banks, as it has done since the first stone. The city sleeps, and our reader closes the book with a tenderness that would suit a little bird. She returns the cuneiform to its shelf and the Latin to its place, and she carries in her mind a quiet braid of things that do not fight unless we let them. 2 rivers, 2 creation songs, 2 visions of counsel and decree. She thinks of the young students who will sit tomorrow in a bright room, their pens ready and their hunger honest. She knows some will come with heads full of echoes, with rumors dressed as legends and legends dressed as proofs. She will not laugh at them. She will light this same lamp, and she will teach them to hear the difference between the river and the shout beside it. Beneath the lantern's quiet, the Vatican stands like a long breath in a long chest. In one wing, a scholar annotates a page about the flood myths of the Near East, mapping the common clouds and the differing rains. In another wing, a priest writes a homily about gratitude, careful not to pluck the easiest thunder from the sky when a small candle will do. In a third, someone older than your grandparents, and kinder than the phrases we use about institutions checks. The binding of a book that will outlive us all. None of these rooms trembles at the Anunnaki. They tremble, if they tremble, at our modern hunger for a shortcut to awe. And so, dear listener, when you hear that old assertion that the Vatican feared the Anunnaki, imagine instead a kind of fear that is almost love, the shepherd's watchfulness when a bright new noise rises near the flock at midnight. He does not hate the noise. He wants to know if it is a storm or a song. He wants to teach his flock to walk toward the right singer when the morning comes. That is all. The rest is books and rain and the long, low patience of truth as it learns to keep its feet under it. While the centuries rearrange the furniture, outside, the clouds loosen their last threads and the starlight mends the sky's small torn places. The Tiber goes on with its dark counsel. Our reader straightens the lens, wipes the desk of crumbs and erasures, and leaves the lamp to die in a polite circle of light. Rome, who has known 1,000 names for wonder, sleeps. The Anunnaki return to their clay, their counsels intact, their mythic dignity unhurt by the thin fashions of our latest hour. The Vatican settles back into the great inhalation of its libraries. The night keeps its promises, and you, resting where you are, may let your breath grow slow. The chapter has placed the pieces on the table: river gods and river liturgy, councils of fate and councils of doctrine, whispers of giants, and the small housekeeping of ideas. In the next hour, we will walk through corridors where real scholars set real pages in order. We will follow the trail of tablets from desert trenches to European reading rooms. We will sit with the patient to craft of translation. We will look at how early Christian thinkers handled old gods without losing their own. We will visit, in kindness, the modern thrill of speculative tales and how to cradle wonder without dropping wisdom. But for now, let your eyes soften. Let the lamp go thin. In the hush, two phrases fold into one another: ash of Nineveh, ink of Rome. Between them, a bridge. Over the bridge, we walk, not in fear of meeting the other side, but in the hope of greeting it with open hands and an unhurried heart. Chapter 2. Tablets, dust, and the patient ear of Rome. The rain has rinsed the city bright, and morning waits off stage like a shy singer. But we linger in the soft midnight of our tale, where lamps still hold their small halos and the floorboards remember every careful step. In this half-light, the past arrives not as a trumpet, but as a courier, a quiet figure with dust on the hems and a bundle of fragile papers threaded with string. He bows, sets the bundle down, and dissolves into the warm breath of the room. We open the string and see, not papers, but time itself, folded into the likeness of pages. Once, far from Rome, far from the cool ribs of basilicas and the lifted palms of saints in gilded paint, men sank their spades into mounds of earth that had learned to look like hills. The locals called them by old names. The maps kept polite silence. Beneath those brown shoulders lay cities that had gone still, rooms that had been courteous to the wind for 1,000 years. A shovel's bite broke the first sentence of a long-forgotten paragraph. Lamps were lit, tents were raised. The belly of the desert listened, at Khorsabad and Nimrod, at Nineveh, whose name had hung in scripture like a distant bell. Figures stepped out of the ground with beards braided into rivers. Palaces inhaled after centuries of holding their breath. And in a buried library, two words that feel like a miracle each time clay tablets lay in drifts like leaves that had chosen to hold their shape. When the men with notebooks lifted them, the light struck wedges pressed by reed and care, and a script that looked like tiny mountain ranges began to walk toward the modern tongue. names future readers would learn to pronounce. Bata and Layard, Razum and Rawlinson stood under the patient sky. One of them bent low and read with his fingers the way one reads when eyes are a luxury. Another sketched the profile of a winged creature to send across the sea with a letter that had the tone of Christmas morning, written by a scholar who does not dare to use exclamation marks. Somewhere, a small bowl of dates was passed around. Somewhere, the wind signed its name on a tent flap and moved on. The library of Ashurbanipal cut its own window into time. There, in a tangle of tablets that had fallen like a ceiling of stars, lay stories of kings and floods, of clever men and grieving gods, of councils called in the firm tone of necessity. There lay grammar beside law, omens beside oblations, catalogues beside poems that carried desserts in their throats. The Anunnaki sat in those lines like magistrates in the margin of a decree, never in a hurry, dignified by function, framed by ceremony. To read them was to step into the administrative warmth of the ancient sacred, where divinity wore protocol like a vestment. The tablets travelled, packed in crates, cushioned with the gentlest materials the century could spare. They crossed water beneath skies that forgot their names each night and remembered them at dawn. Museums opened their steady hands. Universities drew chairs close to lamps. A boy in London read an account of a story on a tablet and, years later, stood trembling as he translated aloud the flood narrative to a room that suddenly listened like a heart. Quiet dates, 1840s, 1850s, 1870s, years when wedges became vowels, when signs shook off their sleep and began to speak. The world's libraries learned a new timbre. A very old river learned to flow in European rooms, and old Rome, that knows how to welcome a procession without losing its poise, tilted its head to listen. The Vatican did not rush to clutch at the new arrivals the way some do when rumors grow wings. Its listening had centuries of practice. It had watched the West translate Aristotle from Arabic bridges, watched Greek fathers come home through printing presses, and watched maps redraw the hem of the known without unsewing heaven, so it did not gasp. It set another chair at the table and took out its pencil. In clerical rooms where books breathe like tame animals, copies of copies began to appear. Photographs of tablets, transcriptions dressed in an alphabet tamed for modern throats. Grammars that walked the learning mind through declensions, as if leading a child by the hand across a river at dusk. The Vatican Library, whose shelves move in long thoughts, made space. The pontifical rooms where scripture is read with a humility that has learned to be brave, received the news as a teacher received a diligent student's surprising essay. With nods, with notes, with the willingness to be corrected in small places and strengthened in others. And, in that willingness, the question of fear came to stand quietly in a corner. We turn to greet it now, not with a lantern thrust at its face, but with the kind of courtesy one offers a fellow traveller who has come far. What could Rome fear? A contradiction so loud it would require a ripping sound to accommodate. No, the loudest contradictions seldom survive mourning. A displacement so simple it could be spoken in a headline. No, headlines are not known for their stamina. It was subtler. The fear, where it rose like a tide against the ankles of those who must guard meanings for many rather than for one. It was the fear that speed would outrun patience, that men would pour vials of wonder and the Anunnaki would have their own wonder into molds the tablets had never offered. It was the fear of conflation, that the council of the Anunnaki, convened in hymns and legal liturgies, might be made to stand as a sudden thunderclap against the Church's slow confession of one source, not because the ancient councils were untrue to their own rivers, But because modern haste is untrue to almost everything it touches, we must speak of translators the way one speaks of midwives, tenderly, with a gratitude that keeps its voice low. Decipherment, those patient decades when Rawlinson stared at cliffs and Hinks at inscriptions, when Oppert and Norris and others argued so politely that their arguments have become a kind of music produced, not spectacle, but tools. With those tools, a reader in any honest study might enter the precincts of Enuma Elish, might hear the long phrase where heavens are assigned, might see the council convene with the confidence of those who keep the calendar of the cosmos. One may watch Marduk rise, not as a modern rumour's gleam, but as a god welcomed by lines familiar with ceremony. One may greet the Anunnaki, not as interlopers from a pulp fever dream, but as the luminous bureaucrats of an ordered sacred world. It is against this fidelity that Rome measured its response. We slide softly into a small room within a larger room, where a quiet priest, whose vocation is footnotes, leans over a sheet. He writes in a careful hand. Parallels are not proofs. He underlines it once, lightly, as if petting a phrase he loves. He writes again. Kinship of motifs does not compel an identity of meaning. He marks the border between flood traditions like a gardener trims hedges, not to erase the flowers, but to let them breathe. Then he draws a tiny star in the margin. The star means, preach this gently, lest the quick and the weary mistake your care for coldness. We pause and look out the window in our minds. Rome glows. The river moves with its dark homework. Somewhere, a Jesuit with an astronomer's patience tracks a comet as if it were a psalm. Somewhere, in the Pontifical Biblical Institute, where the letter is taught to love the soul and the soul the letter, students decline nouns they will one day explain to a parish in a countryside that has never seen a ziggurat. The church has not curled away from old words made new. It has, rather, added rooms to its breathing house rooms, where Akkadian looks slowly at Hebrew and does not scowl, where Sumerian stands beside Genesis and does not shout, but the night keeps a mirror, and we must look. Beyond Rome, a different kind of book is being written. Its cover promises secrets. Its pages propose that gods are machines, that myths are blueprints, that dignity is a trick. It is alluring in the way quick bridges are alluring. Why not leap? And in this allure, the Vatican hears not the voice of ancient rivers, but the cheerful rattle of modern shortcuts. That rattle is the only thing that makes the old house reach for its keys. Fear is too stern a word for such a gesture. Call it watchfulness. Call it the reluctance to allow the human mind, so beautiful when patient, so kind when chastened by time, to be made credulous by appetite. The Anunnaki do not ask to be mistaken for our own reflections. They ask to be read, which is to say honored. When Rome raises an eyebrow, it is not at the clay. It is our hunger to make clay speak only what we would like it to say. The chapter deepens. We step into the British rooms where curators learned to catalogue a wind. Cases lined with tablets look like beehives made of stone. A man in a dark coat bends over one and whispers a word half to himself, half to the wedges, EA. He loves the syllable as one loves a sparrow that keeps returning to a certain windowsill. He notes where the Anunnaki stand in the text called assembled, numbered as carefully as seeds in a farmer's palm. He sends a copy to a friend in Rome with a letter that says, in essence, these are not intruders. They are a grammar from another garden. Read slowly, you will see, and Rome does. A librarian at the Vatican, whose day consists of making sure a book from the 14th century returns to its shelf without complaint, finds his quiet broken by a younger scholar asking for help with a cuneiform edition. The librarian smiles. He remembers when Aristotle arrived as if on the evening train from Toledo. He remembers when philology turned the light on in Greek rooms that had sat in the half-twilight of scholastic paraphrase. He gestures to a seat and brings the new volume as if offering tea. In the corners of such rooms, the old fear melts like frost under a well-aimed ray of sun. We return to our imagined reader. She has drawn a map in the air. Deserts to docks, docks to libraries, libraries to schools, schools to homilies, homilies to kitchens, where a phrase about ancient kings somehow helps a mother speak more gently to her son. That is how texts move when they move well. And here the Anunnaki, far from being a threat that sends the flock scattering into the thorn, serve as neighbors across a low fence. Oh, the soul says, you count the stars too. You name the courts of heaven. You weigh destiny. How familiar, how different. Tell me more, and I will tell you what our fathers sang by oil lamp, when fields were wet with dew. In that exchange, the heart's weather clears. We stop making every resemblance a weapon, every difference a wound. We learn to let an ancient council of gods be itself, without insisting that our own confession of one fountain must either crush it or be crushed. The Vatican's patience belongs here. It is not the patience of delay. It is the patience of the gardener who will not harvest a thought before it's sweet. Let us speak, before the lamp thins, of a single phrase that comforts these rooms. Truth is shy, but not fragile. It can walk beside rivers that speak other names for the sky and not forget its own name. It can listen to a council of Anunnaki adjudicating the destinies of kings and then, in its own time, kneel to say there is one who breathes being itself into such councils, into the kings and into the breath that names them. The shy strength of truth is the reason Rome sleeps at all. Where it fears our neglect of that shyness. Our habit of shouting in rooms where whispering would have been enough. The hour grows kind. We gather our papers. We stack the tablets in their foam beds. We write in the ledger, returned in good order, consulted with care. The courier of dust blows again and becomes hallway air. Rome draws the curtains of its thoughts. The river turns under the bridges like a man changing sides in sleep. And you, dear listener, feel the slow swing of your own breath. Clay and Latin have been introduced. Deserts have knocked on cool stone doors and been invited in. We have watched scholars midwife vowels from wedges and priests sew parallels into a cloth that warms rather than smothers. We have placed the Anunnaki where they ask to be at desks of legality and hymn, in councils of order, and we have watched Rome take notes with the calm of a house that trusts the sun. In the next hush, we will step deeper into the rooms where resemblance is tended with tongs and not with bare hands, rooms where flood stories are placed side by side like two cups on a saucer and tasted slowly, rooms where early Christian writers held the older gods up to the light, not to shame them, but to learn from the craft and the longing that made them. Rooms where the modern storms of spectacle are asked to dry their feet before coming in. For now, keep to the rhythm that has kept you. Let night be both blanket and teacher. Beneath the lanterns quiet, the tablets cool, the rivers Euphrates, Tibers speak a language only water knows, a language every heart somehow understands when it is still. Between them stretches a patient bridge. Over it, we will walk again, unhurried, attentive, letting every ancient syllable have its say without making it say more than it can bear. Chapter 3. Two floods, one memory. Night deepens like ink poured gently into a bowl, and Rome holds its breath the way a library does, when the last page is turned but the lamp is not yet out. We remain in that tender hour where thoughts can walk without shoes. The river outside carries its silver arguments. Inside, we laid 2 cups on one saucer and tasted them slowly. The floods remembered twice. First, the cup shaped by clay. A king grown tired of death searches for a man who outran it. He finds him beyond seas, where the wind wears salt in its hair. Utnapishtim speaks as if his voice was scrolled across water. There was a council, he says, a council of many. The old assembly Anu Enlil, Ea, crowding the sky with decree. Storm was appointed steward of the hour. The windows of heaven did not so much open as obey an order. A boat was measured by the hand, cubit against cubit, animals taken as if memory itself had hooves and feathers and needed boarding. The rain lasted for days. The deep answered without irony. Afterward, a bird drew sunlight on its wings and did not return. A god hung a necklace of promise in the sky. The world exhaled as if it had been holding its breath for centuries. Now, the second cup poured from a scroll. A righteous man is asked to build, and he builds as if obedience were a carpenter's art. The fountains of the deep are unstopped, the cataracts of heaven unpinned. The ark answers the rain by floating, a syllable pronounced by faith over chaos. A dove writes the first cursive of peace in the air and comes back with a leaf in its beak that tastes like the word soon. The earth dries like a face kissed by a towel. A bow takes its place in the sky with the exactness of a covenant. One voice says enough, and waters remember their boundaries. 2 floods, 1 memory floods remembered twice. The night invites no fist here, only an open hand. If you set the tablets beside the scrolls, it is not to scowl, but to listen for the timbers creaking, to feel the wet weight of animals breathing, to hear the sobering silence that comes when the last drop falls and the door unclenches. Echoes hidden in clay meet, echoes inked on vellum, and the room grows kind with recognition. The mind, made brave by gentleness, walks a little farther. Before the Bible, there was clay, not in superiority, but in sequence. The way dawn precedes the day it gladly gives away. The oldest wedges speak of creation, where darkness and water are given their offices, where heaven and earth take their places in a ledger, where lamps are hung among the stars like appointments. In Numa Elish sings Marduk's rise, as if the world were a choir discovering its conductor. The creation myths rewritten, not rewritten, no, that would be hasty weather. Rather, creation songs set side by side, clay and scroll, side by side, each insisting on the dignity of order, each educating chaos into a garden. And what of the first human, the atom of dust, echo of clay? Hands reach into riverbank sediment and lift a shape into the privilege of breath. In Summer's tale, a god mixes blood with dirt. In Israel's hush, God breathes, and man becomes a living soul. The gestures are cousins, not twins. The scent is the same. Wet earth, the first lungful. There is a tenderness in that inhale that neither river will surrender. Our footfalls grow quieter. We are nearing a place where the Vatican's watchfulness puts a hand to the latch and listens. The council of many, hidden in one, that is the hinge. In the Mesopotamian room, a decree is a meeting. Many chairs, many anointed hands, the minutes carefully kept. In Rome's confession, decree flowers from unity. One will, one fountain, one breath, speaking light without committee. The difference is not a quarrel tonight, it is a posture. One vision is a chorus that finds its key by agreement. The other is a single tone whose purity teaches harmony to everything that will one day sing. We do not argue in the dark. We let the differences rest in their own clarity, and we listen for what both rooms love. Both fear chaos, both honor law, both kneel, in their way, before the necessity that the world be held by something more than appetite. Sacred law, sacred power, the old burden of kingship and temple, the sobering knowledge that decisions ripple across fields and families like wind in wheat. Clay temples rose like mountains with steps, scroll temples unfolded like rivers with margins. Both taught that to live is to answer. Somewhere a page turns itself. Serpents, watchers, and giants drift through like figures at the edge of a lamplit square. In one tradition, Apkallu, old sages wade up from water with wisdom as stubborn as stone, their beards thinking in long lines. In another, watchers becomes a word that later readers pour stories into, while giants, Nephilim, cast the anxious shadow of a rumor taller than any man. Serpents coil around knowledge in both gardens, sometimes guardian, sometimes tempter. Their scales catch the same moon. The night will not let us leap to identifications we have not earned. It asks us instead to feel the human pulse under each tale, the ache for guidance, the fear of transgression, the intoxication of sighs. If institutions worry, their worry is pastoral and practical. Silence, censorship, and the vaults are not one thing. They are three, and each has seasons. Silence can be a classroom in which curiosity learns to raise its hand. Censorship can be a bandage poorly applied, a pressure that forgets to check the pulse beneath it. Vaults can be either selfish cupboards or patient cellars where wine becomes itself. The Vatican has been each at different hours. What old house has not? But its best self prefers the cellar that waits, the silence that listens, the gate that opens at the right time with a key that does not scratch the lock. We return to the floods because their waters rinse the mind. Two boats creak in our hearing, one long and angled like a drawn-out note, the other a box made obediently to measure. Inside both, the animal breath is warm, the human breath is prayer. Outside both, the world is learning to be new. The council of many, having sent the deluge, glances at each other and agrees on a limit. The one, having permitted it, declares a boundary with love's ancient firmness. When the doors open, history begins again with sore hands and the surprising brightness of dry ground. The garden before Eden waits up ahead, at the edge of our path, like a courtyard whose fountain talks to itself. Mesopotamia knew sacred enclosures, where trees learned liturgy from priests, where rivers were taught the shape of gratitude by channels that turned them into blessings. Eden, in Israel's heart, is both memory and promise, an orchard of obedience in which the first word spoken by God to the human ear is a permission, with one tree reserved like a bell that should not be rung. Gardens ask for law as naturally as vines ask for a trellis. The night lets us see that without asking us to choose a single hedge to live behind. And so, in the hush, the old question that loves to wear armor, why the Vatican truly feared the Anunnaki, takes its armor off and becomes a modest inquiry holding a candle. It fears not clay, not councils, not floods whose echoes reach the nave and sound like a psalm. It fears the speed with which we turn kinship into confiscation, resemblance into rivalry, difference into a dare. It fears that we will not reread, that we will trade patience for applause, but patience is awake tonight. In some hidden room, a scholar with hands politely stained by ink copies a column from a tablet and sets it against a line in Genesis. He is not trying to make them one. He is trying to make them neighbors. His margin blossoms with small flowers of thought, motifs that rhyme, metaphors that refuse to be identical, verbs that share a dream but not a bed. He closes the book like a prayer answered with a smile. Outside, the river's shoulder presses into its bank. A cat steps like punctuation across the page of a piazza. The lamp lowers, and you, dear listener, feel your breath grow even. Clay and scroll have sat together without argument. Their nearness has not made either faint. The memory of water moves behind your eyes with the softness of sleep. If you listen carefully, you will hear in both stories a promise strung like a bow across the sky, the shape of mercy taught to thunder. In the next quiet hour, we will move from water to law, from floodplains to throne rooms, where decrees are signed and crowns transferred, where sacred law, sacred power, becomes a pair of scales in steady hands. We will stand beside kings whose names the dust still keeps, and ask how they're right. To rule was argued before altars and within tablets, and we will watch, with the kindness of wakeful rest, how Rome learned to hear those arguments without handing its own scepter to a rumor. For now, let the rains recede inside you. Let the door of your heart open on dry ground. Let the birds you love return, leaf in beak, promising that morning is closer than it feels. Chapter 4. Sacred Law, Sacred Power. Night settles into the grains of the desk, and the lamp writes a small circle of gold upon the wood. In this quiet ring, we place 2 scales and a crown, not the heavy crown of spectacle, but the circlet of duty that kingship wears when no one is looking. The air smells of warmed leather and a faint sweetness from old glue. Outside, the river keeps its counsel. Inside, we listen for the sentences that once steadied empires. Sacred law, sacred power. First, clay rises again, steady as a judge. On a pillar dark as dried rain, a king stands before a seated god, hands lifted in the grammar of reverence. The scene is carved with such patience that even the fringe of the god's garment has the dignity of a legal clause. We do not need to read the script to feel the arrangement. Power kneels to a law it did not invent. Law speaks with a voice that leans outward from heaven. Beneath the image, columns of wedges flow like a formal river. They tell a public story about order. How a city is guarded from caprice. How widows are seen. How fields are measured. How promises are bounded by words that can be weighed. The clay remembers that judgment belongs to the square, not the alley. The tablet does not scream at tyrants. It instructs them. It does not say kings are gods. It says kings must answer to gods. And in the hush of that distinction, a people can sleep. In these lines, the Anunnaki, those dignitaries of decree, hover as the grammar behind the grammar, the assembly in whose shadow rules are valid. Fate is not the chaos of appetite, it is an adjudicated thing, written with a careful hand. Now the scroll opens, and its parchment breathes a different music of authority. From Sinai's flame to the quiet chambers where scribes indexed mercy into statute, law comes as a gift before it comes as a threat. You shall, it says, like a hand placed gently on a shoulder that has not yet learned how to bear another day. You shall not, it says, like a fence that knows the cliff's edge well enough to stand in the way of sleepwalking. In this telling, the crown is never first. First comes deliverance, then obligation. First comes promise, then pattern. Power is not the source of law, love is. And so the commandments are not the bars of a cage, but the keys to staying human. Between clay and scroll, a conversation begins to glow. Both insist that life is larger than whim. Both place the ruler under a sky that speaks. one house that sky in councils. The other hears a single voice breaking through. We do not make the two fight, we let them teach. The Mesopotamian mind trusts the choreography of an assembly, each divine office attending to its sphere. The biblical mind trusts the simplicity of one whose will threads all spheres together. In both, a human king finds himself a steward rather than a source, a sobering rank that keeps pride from setting fire to wheat. Enter the scribe who loves the city more than his own flair. He sits with grievances. He copies contracts. He records a stranger's name correctly so that the stranger may one day own a house without argument. His reed stylus is modest as a sparrow. His lines outlive palaces. He knows that law is not a statute, it is a habit. He knows that justice is not only a verdict. It is a vocabulary a people shares when it stands in a doorway to adjudicate harm. Somewhere in Rome, centuries later, a scholar smiles at this affinity. He writes in the margin, "Procedures are prayers that cities say to themselves, and yet, beneath this calm, the old anxiety stirs the one that makes the Vatican set its keys down gently and listen for breaches. Power is a beautiful servant and a ruinous master. If sacred procedures are mistaken for sanctity itself, if the choreography of divine councils is taken as a license for human elites to insulate themselves from rebuke, then the grammar that once steadied the street becomes a theatre for the few. Clay can be misread as iron, scroll can be thinned into slogans. The fear, where it lives, lives here, that we will enthrone form and forget the breath that gives it meaning. In the hush, we visit a courtroom whose roof is the open sky. Witnesses speak with voices made smaller by nerves, but truth enlarges them sentence by sentence. A judge listens like a clean river absorbing silt. A priest watches, not to intrude, but to remember that verdicts echo in sanctuaries. Behind the bench are tablets. Behind the tablets, a cosmology that assigns weight to words. There is no justice without metaphysics. There is no mercy without a memory of who made the human face. The Vatican, caretaker of faces, nods at this and writes again in its small hand. Law is the architecture of love in a world where love must be translated into calendars and fines. And so we turn to kingship, its heights and hazards. The ancient king builds temples with hands that have learned the measure of stone. He funds rituals that rehearse the world's dawn each year, so that crops do not lose courage. He blesses canals, he dedicates gates. In return, he asks for trust. But trust is not the same as awe. Awe belongs to the source of rain. Good kings know this and sleep. Bad kings forget it and grow eyes that never close. On a Roman desk, a small note lies under a paperweight. Sacred power exists to protect sacred law, not replace it. A line like that holds a city together when summer is too long. In one tradition, the king must mirror the assembly's balance. In another, he must mirror the one's mercy and justice. Either way, he is a mirror, not a sun. The Vatican, versed in mirrors and their moods, keeps gentle watch, less a suspicion of the past than of our present ease in making human thrones taller than they need to be. We pass into the temple economy, where offerings move like quiet caravans toward granaries and altars. Priests count, scribes tally. Widows come with a measure of grain that is the whole of their day. The calendar ties moons to rituals the way a mother ties ribbons. Not for display, but to keep hair from the eyes during work. In these precincts, law tastes like bread. Its abstractions become loaves and weights and measures, so that the poor do not pay twice for the same handful. When law forgets bread, it grows theatrical. When it remembers bread, it grows human. From bread to books, Sacred lore lives in libraries as surely as in courts. Shelves curve like ribs around the lung of memory. Silence, censorship, and the vaults, the three walk through here like distant cousins who only sometimes get along. Silence, when chosen, is a steward. It lets difficult words ripen. Censorship, when panicked, hardens into the kind of frost that kills seedlings. Vaults, when wise, are simply pantries with locks that open at the right hour. The Vatican has known all three. At its best, it keeps the silence that feeds speech, refuses the censorship that flatters fear, and opens the vault as a liturgy of trust, clay and scroll. Side by side, we sit again with the old phrase that tempts headlines, the counsel of many hidden in one. Tonight, we are not detectives, we are guests. We do not pry up floorboards to expose a secret design. We listen instead for how unanimity and plurality answer the same ache, the ache that power be accountable. An assembly prevents a single will from forgetting the edges of things. A single will prevents an assembly from dissolving into perpetual rehearsal. Both aim at justice. Both demand humility from the crowned. The serpent passes the doorway of our thought, leaving the faintest escurve of suggestion. In clay rooms, serpents can be guardians of thresholds, wise and coiled at the base of sacred trees. In scroll rooms, a serpent can be the whispering misdirection that relabels bondage as freedom and calls it enlightenment. The Vatican does not fear the animal. It fears the habit of hearing a whisper, as if it were a trumpet. Serpents, watchers, and giants figures that carry our desire for guidance, our fear of trespass, our infatuation with scale. The best law shepherds desire without shaming it, build fences without building prisons, and measure greatness by service rather than shadow length. We pause at a window the mind has opened. Rain has ended. The stone shines. The city seems freshly washed of exaggeration. That is what good law does. It rinses. It leaves detail visible and ornaments intact, but it carries off the dust of self-importance that makes everything look older than it is. A well-made ordinance is a clean street at dawn. Sacred power exists to keep the sweepers funded and harassed. In a study not far from a chapel, an old teacher bends over a young scholar's draft. The scholar has arranged parallels between a river assembly's decrees and a prophet's thunder. The teacher draws a soft line between them and writes in the margin, "Parallels invite, they do not kidnap." The sentence is a kindness. It allows both worlds to be themselves and still walk the same road for a while. It is the kindness the Vatican hopes to model when it opens a case containing a tablet and a case containing a codex, and lets them share the same light. Now the lamp thins and our chapter gathers its pages like a cloak. We have placed our hands on the scales and found them warm from use. We have seen crowns that know their weight and do not press. We have heard law in wedges and law in letters, both speaking against the loneliness of appetites. We have watched Rome learn from clay without being mesmerized, and we have watched clay keep its poise before Rome's long habit of rereading. If there is fear in such rooms, it is a gardener's fear, the dread of seeing a young vine trained too quickly, forced into an arch that looks impressive by noon but breaks at sunset. The remedy is patience. The gardener lengthens the cord by which the vine is led. He trusts the plant's desire for height and offers it time. Law and power, in their sacred forms, are trellises. They succeed when they disappear into fruit. Breathe. Let the breath remind you that justice begins not with punishment, but with the simple act of counting a neighbor's pain as if it were your own. Let the night tell you that crowns can serve and laws can sing. Let the quiet assure you that ancient councils and single voices are not enemies in the dark. They are lamps set at different ends of the same long hallway, each teaching us how to walk without stumbling. In the next soft turning, we will step toward thresholds and gardens, toward the hush where beginnings are told and retold. We will listen for the serpents again, and for the watchers who lean over the railings of old stories. We will follow echoes that move from riverbanks to cloisters, and we will see how myths remember what doctrine refines. For now, close your eyes the way a book closes, knowing it will open again, already full of the page you've come to love. Chapter 5. The Garden Before Eden. Night opens like a gate on soft hinges, and we step through into an older orchard than memory will usually admit. It is not Eden yet. It is a precinct drawn by careful hands along the rivers, where trees were taught the manners of worship and water learned to part its generosity by channels and basins. Priests walked here, counting steps the way one counts heartbeats, and a faint perfume of cedar, date, and barley breathed out from altars that had practiced sunrise for generations. Lamps burned in recesses as if stars had been persuaded to come indoors. This is the garden before Eden, the training ground of longing. In that first orchard, serpents were not yet villains. They were keepers of thresholds, patient as carved posts, symbols of vitality winding around the trunk of life. On stone reliefs, a serpent holds the base of a sacred tree the way a priest holds a text, not to devour, but to steady. Elsewhere, a winged figure, wise as granite, extends a cone that looks like a pine, but might be a gesture of blessing, as if pollinating order. The Apkallu, the old sages of river cities, move in pairs. Their garments are grammars of feathers and fish, creatures of the seam between waters below and wisdom above. They are not angels of our latter tongue. They are the dignity of skill personified, artisanship given a face. And then the scroll opens, speaking its slow vowels over the same human ache. To be placed in a garden, to be told that life is a gift and work at once, to hear that freedom tastes richest when one tree is kept as a bell you do not ring. Here, the serpent is different. It leans in with an intimacy that is almost kindness, and then slides a word out of joint. It offers knowledge, but knowledge that pretends to outgrow the giver, that wants to stand on its own feet and call that independence wisdom. The difference between guardian and tempter is narrow enough to trip the unwary. The Vatican's watchfulness lives in this narrowness. Symbols travel well, meanings change address. The soul must learn the local language of each garden before it interprets its signs. The watchers arrive next, quiet as silhouettes above a parapet. In the clay world, sages teach cities how to harvest syllables, how to make the night's will legible in the morning's contracts. In later Jewish imagination, watchers become warning beings who left their appointed post, trading station for appetite, instruction for intrusion. The shift is not a contradiction so much as a caution. The higher the post, the sweeter the gravity. What watchers can also want. The ancient mind knew this and told stories so that desire would learn its own name and not masquerade as blessing. Giants walk the edge of both horizons. On tablets, kings boast measurements that make architects nod and skeptics smile. Heights that prove devotion by exaggeration, shadows as long as royal memory. In scripture, the Nephilim step in like a rumor with shoulders too broad for the doorframe of ordinary days. Their size is the point and the problem. Scale intoxicates us. A tower is easier to admire than a kindness. The church, having spent centuries ministering to hearts that either worship bigness or despair for lack of it, reads such passages with a pastoral hand. Grandeur is not goodness. Tallness is not truth. We move deeper among the trees. Water speaks in low grammar, repeating a single verb with 1,000 accents as it passes from channel to pool. The garden teaches without raising its voice. In the river cities, sacred enclosures rehearsed cosmos in miniature gates aligned to stars, paths traced to echo the circuitry of the heavens, the god's house a mountain built by human patience. In Genesis, the garden rehearses covenant in miniature gifts offered, limits named, companionship established, work dignified, rest sanctified, 2 gardens, 1 ache. To learn how to belong, at a small stone bench, we pause and open a thin book of comparisons. Parallels are invitations, the margin reminds us. They are not crowbars. Here is a serpent by a tree, and here is a serpent by a tree. Here is a planted sanctuary, and here is a planted sanctuary. Here is wisdom coming down like dew. Here is wisdom reaching up like a vine. The temptation is to flatten nuance until all gardens become one and all serpents hiss the same sentence. But the heart sleeps better when distinctions are allowed to breathe. The river garden's serpent blesses boundaries. Eden's serpent unbuttons one. The Apkallu bring craft to cities. The Watchers, as later told, abandon craft for trespass. The giants of boastful inscription secure a king's legend. The giants of sacred rumor caution against swagger. Similar images, differing aims. In a quiet vault, one of those rooms that royalty and religion both build when they fear misplacing a page someone has tucked away, reliefs and tablets that bear the weight of these images. Silence keeps them company. Silence, when it is wise, is a tutor. It allows the soul to learn punctuation. Censorship, when it is panicked, is something else. A hand thrown over a candle that is blamed for the darkness that follows. Vaults become virtuous when they open at the right hour with the right guide standing at the threshold. Clay and scroll, side by side, ask for such guides. The Vatican has learned this, the difficult way and the gentle way, and on its better nights, it chooses to be a docent, not a guard. The docent leads us to a panel where 2 winged figures flank a stylized tree. Protocol, she whispers, as if translating a liturgy. This is what holiness looked like when cities were new. The correct approach to fertility, the right choreography of offering, life organized so that abundance and gratitude share the same room. She turns a page in our imaginary book and shows a verse where a garden is tended without sweat and named without grasping. And this, she says, is what holiness looks like when trust is the script. Receive, keep, obey, enjoy. She does not make them the same. She lets them face each other across the centuries with the courtesy of equals, both bearing witness that human flourishing is never accidental. A wind moves through the leaves of our thoughts. The serpent reappears, but now we notice the tool it uses more precisely. A small turn of language, a gentle sharpening of God's word until it cuts the wrong thing. The first temptation is editorial. It shifts the punctuation of trust. The ancient river knew how words can carry fate. Destinies were assigned by syllables carved in clay. The scroll knows how words can heal or break. Blessing and curse travel by the tongue. Between them stands our fragile habit of listening. The Vatican fears hasty listening more than serpents. Because haste is the serpent's favorite climate, we come upon a low wall. Beyond it, a vista. Cities rising like stone gardens out of flat plains. Cloisters folding their self-discipline around courtyards where citrus trees insist on sun even in winter. The kinship is obvious and may be overstated. What matters tonight is the soft lesson they share. Boundaries are not prisons when they protect a love. A hedge that keeps the fox from the grapes is not a tyranny. It is a benediction learned from the nature of grapes. The early gardens, whether by river or by scripture, shape desire into delight by teaching where not to step. A memory taps our shoulder. In earlier hours, we spoke of councils, many chairs up there, one source over here. Gardens also ask the same question in green. Is life best tended by distributed rituals or by a trust in a single voice? The answer, in practice, is that people need both choreography and covenant. The orchards of the rivers trained bodies into reverence. The orchard of Eden trained a heart into consent. The church keeps both instruments in its case and worries when either is dropped. Too much ritual without consent becomes spellwork. Too much consent without ritual becomes a vow forgotten by noon. The watchers lean in again, this time as a mirror. Guard what you are given, they seem to say, and do not step across the fence you are assigned to watch. It is a humble doctrine, but humility is a gardener's main tool. When guardians forget their posts, the story darkens quickly. Knowledge that was meant to serve starts to show off. Skill that was meant to heal begins to bargain. The Vatican's caution here is not fear of knowledge. It is fear of knowledge unmoored from obedience, a library without keys and a city without night guards. Somewhere, a bell rings not to alarm, but to mark the hour when thought should lie down. Before we do, one last glance at giants, for they haunt modern rooms in new suits. We enlarge numbers and call them significance. We multiply platforms and call it influence. We confuse reach with substance until our hearts feel small by comparison. The old stories bring us back to life's sized scale. Giants can be impressive and tragic. They do not have to be exemplary. The better measure is mercy hidden in ordinary height, the gardener stooping to tie a vine that is losing its courage. The lamp's circle shrinks, and our path bends toward the door. What have we gathered here among the trees? Those symbols are faithful companions who sometimes change their wardrobes. That serpents guard and serpents tempt, and wisdom keeps to dictionaries, one for each mood. That watchers warn us as much about ourselves as about the sky. Those giants remind us to stop mistaking volume for virtue. Those gardens, whether before Eden or named Eden, teach us the choreography of belonging. Receive, tend, refrain, and rejoice. We step back through the gate. The garden, which seemed so ancient, nods as if we had only borrowed an hour from its long afternoon. The river beyond keeps up its litany. Rome sleeps with one ear open, as old cities do. In a nearby study, a scholar copies a note for tomorrow's lesson. Parallels are neighbors, not mergers. Read both, love both, let each mean what it means. He sets down his pen and smiles at how small that sentence looks beside the size of the questions it steadies. And you, dear listener, may let your own questions walk at the pace of a garden's path. No need to hurry. The serpents will stay in their texts until you return. The watchers will remain on their railings, reminding you that vigilance is love's synonym when the night is deep. The giants will keep their distance and their legend. Your task is simpler and sweeter. To tend a little plot of thought with patience, to water it with rest, to prune it with gentle distinctions until fruit appears. In the next hush, we will leave orchards for archives, silence, censorship, and the vault's rooms where knowledge learns to wait well, and where gates decide when to open. We will walk the cool corridors where clay and parchment, photograph and photocopy, edition and erratum, share shelves without jealousy. We will watch how a house of faith learns to be a house of reading. and how fear, when it shows up, becomes, at its best, a careful hand on a careful latch. For now, let sleep climb the trellis of your breath, leaf by leaf, until your whole night is green. Chapter 6. Silence, Censorship, and the Vaults. Night becomes a corridor, and we walk it slowly. Stone cools the air. Footfalls soften until they seem to belong to someone else long ago. A librarian, perhaps, carrying a key on a ribbon, a pencil smoothed to a quiet point. The door ahead is heavy but not unfriendly. It keeps out draught and dust and haste. On its face, the polished circle where many hands have pushed looks like a small moon worn by centuries of entry. We touch that moon and pass through into the rooms where knowledge learns to wait. Silence meets us first. Not the silence of emptiness, but the full silence that follows a good sentence. In this quiet, the shelves breathe like timber after rain. Clay tablets sleep in trays like flat loaves, ready for another oven. Scrolls rest in their boxes like birds folded for the evening. Codices lean together with the easy intimacy of old friends. The air smells of linen, leather, gum, Arabic, and a hint of cedar that has drifted here from crates opened decades ago. Somewhere, a clock speaks in small syllables, and each syllable gives the room permission to continue existing. In such places, the Vatican has practiced the virtue of listening for longer than anyone can remember. Already, the mind relaxes. Silence is not an enemy of truth, it is its meadow. Here, arguments grow into fruit because they are not harvested before sweetness. Here, the delicate parallels we have traced clay beside scroll, councils beside a single will, gardens before and after Eden ripen into clarity. A young scholar arrives with her questions, trembling like birds in her hand. The old librarian places a finger lightly on the table, a gesture that means patience, and patience teaches the scholar how to breathe. Censorship is a word that tenses the jaw, and it has lived in these houses too. It enters first as anxiety, then as policy, then sometimes as regret. When fear grows louder than trust, a hand may reach to close a book too soon, to darken a page, to hide a shelf. The history of every great library includes such hours. This, too, is part of the story we are telling. But the best houses learn from their winters. They learn how to distinguish between the shelter that helps a text bloom and the shade that keeps it from seeing its own color. They learn how to open a door to scholars while still protecting what moth and hand might harm. Over time, the vault becomes a pantry rather than a prison, and the key becomes a sacrament of timing rather than a baton of refusal. We walk to a case where photographs of tablets share space with crisp additions. On one page, wedges have been inked as little mountains. On the facing page, a language we can read carries its meaning with careful vowels and footnotes, like stepping stones over a stream. The relief of a winged figure hangs nearby, quiet as an old judge who no longer insists on being greeted, but is always greeted anyway. These juxtapositions are the work of a generous mind. Clay speaks to paper, paper to clay. Nothing is forced. Clay is allowed to be administrative and luminous at once. Scripture is allowed to be intimate and vast. Between them stands a lectern where, for a century and more, patient voices have said aloud the words of both without trying to make either say what it cannot. It is here that the rumor we began with loses its loudness. Why the Vatican truly feared the Anunnaki, if fear there was, dissolves into the gentler language of stewardship. The house feared confusion more than clay, spectacle more than story, conflation more than kinship. It is feared that the appetite for astonishment would outpace the appetite for understanding. It was feared that old words would be made to work new tasks by hands, too hurried to read them in their own light. So it guarded not a dogma against a tablet, but a habit of reading against a fashion of leaping. On a table nearby, a register lies open. Names have been entered with a kind of affection. Assyrian kings who measured years the way trees measure rings, priests who counted offerings like rain, translators who carried rain into alphabets that had never known the Euphrates. There are also names from other wings of the house. Augustine, who weighed myths without cruelty. Jerome, who taught words to sit still long enough to be translated. Aquinas, who loved Aristotle without worshipping him. The register is a map of hospitality. It says, guests may be different and still be welcomed. Positions may be firm and still learn. We pause by the cabinet that holds printed wonders, the first editions of works that taught Europe to hear the clay. Here are the sober reports from trenches where workers brushed sand from letters that had slept 1,000 years. Here are the lectures where flood stories were read in English for the first time to listeners who felt their hearts widen with a mixture of recognition and surprise. Here are the grammars, stitched together by fingers stiff with effort, that took students by the hand along declensions they would at first resent and later cherish. Even the errata slips warm the heart. They prove that truth prefers correction to pride. They prove that a library is a living creature. The docent, who has been quiet long enough to make her presence seem inevitable, points us toward a smaller room. This one is less ceremonious. Its tables are scarred a little. Its chairs forgive a slouch. On a shelf stands a battered sign. Parallels invite. They do not kidnap. The sign is a joke and a rule. Here, students lay clay and scrolls side by side, not to make them one, not to steal the dignity of either, but to let each be read in the presence of the other. One day, they will teach elsewhere parishes and universities, museums and schools. They will carry with them the scent of this room. They will know the difference between a headline and a history, between a theory and a text, between a thrill and a truth that holds. We sit, and the docent sets before us to thin volumes. In one, the Council of the Anunnaki convenes with administrative grandeur. Decrees written like an evening schedule that will be kept no matter the weather. In the other, a prophet hears a single voice like thunder, learning tenderness. We read one page from each, then close both books and listen. The silence answers as if it had been asked a question. It says, "You do not have to make these enemies or twins." It says, "Let them share the lamp." It says, "If you learn to read slowly here, you will be less likely to be fooled, where speed is sold as wisdom." And so we visit the vault. Its door is thick. Its handle feels like a handshake from an ancestor. Inside, temperature and light are kept with a devotion that would be worship, if it were not so useful. The vault is a promise made to the future on behalf of the past. A promise that clay will not crumble, that inks will not fade, that memories will not be left outdoors in weather that does not care about them. Once, vaults were also hiding places for ideas. Sometimes they still are. But on good days, they are simply cellars where wine learns its name. The Vatican, when it is most itself, uses such rooms as stages for the right hour. It opens them when the guide is ready, when the guest cannot harm, when the text has a companion on the outside who will answer foolishness with courtesy and clarity. A memory returns from earlier chapters. We stood in floodwaters and felt the boat rock. We stood in the courts and felt the scale balance. We stood in gardens and learned the choreography of belonging. Now we stand in archives and learn the grammar of time. The grammar is modest, keep, catalogue, compare, correct, confess ignorance when you must, and rejoice when a line suddenly means more than you thought without meaning less than it meant. This grammar is a school for souls no less than for scholars. It turns fear into vigilance without bitterness. It turns wonder into work without scolding. Through the high window, a late star appears, small and unmistakable. It reminds the mind of another wing of this house, the observatory, where men trace orbits in the dark and call it worship to measure what God has made. The star is a friendly contradiction to panic. If a universe so large can still be intimate to a prayer, then a myth as old as the Anunnaki can still be intimate to a theology that believes in one. If the lights scattered across the black are not a threat to the sun, then councils of many are not a threat to the fountain of being that monotheism loves. The sky has always been the best reassurance of proportion. We walk back along the corridor toward the door. At the threshold, the docent leaves us with a small sentence that glows after she is gone. Books do not fight. Readers do. The sentence is not a rebuke, but a blessing. It asks us to be the kind of readers who refuse the quarrels that laziness loves and welcome the conversations that patience deserves. It asks us to remember that clay did not write itself to shock us, and scripture did not breathe itself to compete. Both arose because human beings needed to locate themselves in a world too generous and too dangerous to live in without a map. Outside, the river resumes its soft counsel. Streets smell faintly of last rain. A single lamp behind a shutter is moving like a heartbeat. We have spent our chapters among floods and laws, gardens and archives. We have watched councils convene and a single voice speak. We have stood with a church that, for all its failures and seasons of fear, has also learned to be a house of reading, a house that believes time is a friend of truth. We have greeted the Anunnaki as magistrates of an ordered, sacred world, not as rivals to a love that speaks creation with a simple word. We have climbed the patient steps that knowledge builds for rest. Now the book of night closes with the gentleness of cotton drawn over a sleeping child. The lamp narrows to a coin. The city sighs. You, dear listener, have walked far and slowly, which is the right way to go far at all. Keep the slowness. Keep the courtesy. Keep the learned suspicion of spectacle and the learned affection for texts that ask you to reread. If the rumor returns, let it find you here again in a quiet room where clay and scroll are neighbors, where fear has turned into watchfulness, and where watchfulness has turned into peace. And so the night falls quiet, carrying their whispers into silence. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss another whisper in the night. Until we meet again, good night.